The WWE has been in a weird place lately, with the boss man, Vince McMahon, finally calling it quits. But while the leading brands Raw and SmackDown have been yo-yoing up and down since this year's WrestleMania, NXT seems to be shooting for the stars. In fact, the brand's just registered its highest rating since June. So is something big happening over there? Or is it just pure coincidence? Let's dive in and find out. First up, WWE NXT finishes 7th on the cable charts. With the WWE increasingly adopting a more streaming-centered model for its future, it still gets the majority of its viewership from cable TV viewers. With that said, NXT is just one of those brands that always finds itself in limbo, as the company's top management doesn't quite know what to do with it. Like, of course, it's a way for people to watch the up-and-comers in the business, and that's good enough. Plus, to be fair, we've seen some pretty massive stars like Roman Reigns come through the ranks of the brand as well. It's just that people don't tend to tune into it week in and week out like they do with the main stuff, which honestly is to be expected. So perhaps this is why cable viewership matters even more when it comes to NXT. Thankfully though, after a lull of a couple of months, things are back on track, as it finished 7th on the cable charts with a rating of 0.15. For context, that's up over 15% from last week, and it's the highest rating for the show since June 21. In terms of the bigger picture, we saw an average of 650,000 people tuning in on the USA Network alone, which are pretty insane numbers. As a result, this made Tuesday's post In Your House episode the third most watched NXT outing for the year. What shows did it trail behind though? Well, for starters, Tucker Carlson's show on Fox News was #1 on the night, with NBC's America's Got Talent trailing behind. So in the grand scheme of things, it's actually kind of surprising that a second-tier wrestling show could even be mentioned among those giants of the entertainment industry. Up next, a fantastic In Your House contributed to the show's boost. Now, NXT's pay-per-view events aren't exactly the most advertised things in the world, especially when it comes to the WWE Network, so people weren't really expecting anything crazy from last month's In Your House either. After all, most of the wrestling fan attention was on SummerSlam and its offshoot shows anyway, and while that was obviously the talk of the town this week, people still somehow tuned into NXT despite the odds being against it. Apparently, one of the biggest reasons that are cited internally is that In Your House was a massive success, so much so that people came back to stream recordings of the show. Plus, to be fair, the word of mouth's a strong instrument for wrestling events like this. What exactly prompted people to be so interested in NXT all of a sudden? Like, what went down at In Your House that was so good? Well, for starters, the main event between Braun Breaker and Joe Gacy was easily one of the highlights of the night. The match was full of twists and turns as Breaker tried super hard to control his anger and frustration. The challenger, on the other hand, used the champion's impatience to his advantage, continuously trying to make him commit a mistake and get disqualified. But of course, beating a powerhouse like Braun isn't easy at all. After all, there's a reason why he won that belt in the first place. Oh, and of course, it wouldn't have been the main event without some off-ring drama. So we saw Gacy try an Eddie Guerrero disqualification by faking a steel chair hit. Sadly for him, the second official was there to explain the situation to the main ref. Other than that, there was also that massive spear through the announce table for Breaker. And honestly, this proved why the current champ is such a beast in the ring and deserves to be on top. Interestingly enough, the best match of the night wasn't even the NXT Championship fight. Instead, it was the NXT Tag Team title match between Pretty Deadly and the Creed brothers. What made it even better, though, was the fact that the current champs were dethroned, handing Prince and Wilson a much-awaited run with some silverware. Besides, it all ended in a pretty wholesome manner as the Creed's parents walked up to the ring to celebrate the massive win. So no wonder why everyone was clamoring to follow up on the storylines stemming from the pay-per-view. Now, the follow-up NXT 2.0 night was also full of incredible matchups. Heading into this weekend of NXT, there were a lot of question marks looming over the future of the tag team title and Joe Gacy after his big loss. Oh, and then there was the North American Championship match on the cards as well, with Carmelo Hayes sending an open challenge to anyone brave enough to fight him. Before we get into the actual round though, we've got to talk about JD McDonough, as he's been on the heels of Breaker for a matchup during NXT Heatwave Summit. And boy, did he commit to his bet as he came out on stage over the weekend and demanded the champ to sign the contract. The Irish ace may have taken it too far though, as he literally cut himself and signed the paper with his own blood. The reigning champ, on the other hand, felt unusually composed and didn't seem fazed by JD's antics at all. In fact, if anything, we'd say that he asserted his dominance in the ring and hopes to carry it with him to the next main event as well. but he did say that the 32-year-old could prove to be a much tougher opponent than anyone he's faced, including Tommaso Ciampa and Dolph Ziggler. After that, a fatal 4-way tag match lit up the entire arena. The most explosive matchup of the weekend was definitely the insane Women's Tag Team Championship Fatal 4-Way Elimination. And as much as that name's a mouthful, the match was even more intense as Chance and Crater managed to go up against the odds and claim the belt. Of course, they had to take on 3 other teams in the ring, which sounds insane in and of itself. Why were 4 teams even taking each other on for the title? Like, isn't this usually a 2 versus 2 affair? Well, if you didn't know, the Women's Tag Team Championship was actually vacant before the matchup, giving birth to this crazy challenge. Nyla and Paxley, who were also called Toxic Attraction, controlled the match for the majority of the time and even had some breathing time to talk trash. They really looked like a well-oiled machine and were fully on track to steamroll the opposition and claim an easy title win. When it came down to the final 2, however, things started to turn in Chance and Carter's favor as they powered through the earlier beating to win the championship. Next, Melo retains his NXT North American Championship. Now, Carmelo Hayes' open challenge was pretty cocky, as there were obviously going to be at least a few people trying to take him up on it. And surprise, surprise, there were, as both Giovanni Vinci and Nathan Frazer made a run for the ring to get a shot at that title. Honestly though, this whole sequence was perhaps more entertaining than the match itself, as Frazer managed to skip past Vinci and make his ambitions official. After all, the Italian was the more challenging opponent for Melo. So the whole thing was pretty predictable as the reigning champ obliterated Nathan Frazer and kept his bragging rights intact. Oddly enough, this was still one of the better matchups of the night, as nothing else really stood out. Of course, the fatal 4-way earlier was the headline stealer, but we would have expected something more from the likes of Von Wagner or Joe Gacy. Don't get us wrong though, the falls count anywhere closer was still decent enough as Solo Sikoa took Wagner for a ride outside the ring and splashed him through the announce table to claim the win. Also, this sets him up nicely for a shot at Melo's North American Championship. And finally, a lot of top NXT talent is moving up the ranks in WWE. One of the biggest reasons behind NXT's recent resurgence could also have something to do with the fact that we're seeing a lot of stars making their way into the main WWE roster. And ever since Triple H has taken charge from Vince McMahon, he's kind of sped up that process as well. In fact, those close to the game say that he started a quote-unquote feeling out process regarding new additions to the lineup. For instance, we've already seen the former NXT Women's Champion Io Sky make the jump to the main roster. On top of that, Cross, who'd left the scene after a lackluster spell with NXT, is also looking to return and impact the big events in the future. So yeah, a lot's happening in the lower leagues of the WWE, and exciting times lie ahead. That's a wrap for this video. Do you think that Triple H could put the NXT through another overhaul for a 3.0 reboot? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.